investment going in the right places? Dr. Ulrik.
So I think that I think it is a good indication that of things to come. However, I think it's highly concerning where the investments are going. We're seeing a market where I remember 25 years ago when I first heard about venture capital, somebody told me that be careful, they invest like sheep. And that's a little bit like what happens right now in education. We're looking for things with a very short horizon, and in my opinion, what we need is something else in education. We need long-term investments, infrastructure investments, people who dare to invest in things with a 10-year return. And that's a very, very different thing than what we're seeing right now.
How can we convince them to be less sheep-like and go in the right direction?
So my original background is medicine, and medicine would change in the 50s and 60s, where the markets were driven by your ability to invite doctors on around the world trips, and therefore they bought your drugs. In education, we don't have Cochrane, we don't have science that are driving the adoption decisions. And I think that we as an industry are just as much at fault for not having been able to move in that direction, but are still living on a paradigm of flashy brochures and salespeople knocking on doors. But I think the current headwinds that a lot of education companies are facing might actually change that in a good direction.
We need to get out there on tours and press the flesh. Okay. Hamdi, talk to me about the levels of investment and whether you see it as misdirected or not enough.
I think just to follow up on this point, by nature, when an edtech startup is venture-backed, it needs to immediately start proving results to keep on raising funds and have it sustainable. And I think the challenge for edtech startups is to do that, because I was discussing with Dino earlier, and he was saying, and I know we're going to get to this, but he was saying how education requires a comprehensive technology solution. But if you come to think about it, the education space is extremely fragmented, and there are so many problems to solve at the same time. And the way edtech startups emerge is they come and they focus on one single issue, which is the right thing to do when you're venture-backed, and then they start working on it. But the result is that you end up having a wide spectrum of edtech startups tackling different issues, where long-term, my view is you will have to see some sort of consolidation of these efforts. But until you get there, the ones that don't make it are just gonna, unfortunately, disappear.
Such a lot of effort, such a lot of research and development gone to waste because arguably of unrealistic expectations and expectations of a delivery on return for the investment by shareholders?
I wouldn't say unrealistic expectations. I mean, for us, thankfully, as Abwaab, we like 2.5 years in, we've been able to deliver very well. But if you look at the broader edtech space, it is quite tough for an edtech startup to be focused on delivering educational value, but also scaling in the same way as other businesses, such as ride sharing and food delivery and fintech scale. So it's definitely a tough industry to be in.
Abhishek, let me come to you next. Let's talk about where these funds are flowing. Where is investment coming from? Where is it going to?
So, I think the good thing, at least personally, I invest in healthcare and in education. So if you just use the numbers, healthcare is a $7 trillion market. Education also globally is a $7 trillion market. So we start at the same place. Publicly listed companies and their market cap in healthcare, $6 trillion. In education, 155 billion, right? So right there, there's I guess, a dramatic difference between healthcare and education. And then even sector funds, healthcare has more than 200 sector funds, just doing healthcare. Education has 8. So there's something amiss between two like-minded sectors. I think, but all these things are a journey. So if we just look back to 2010, you mentioned last year, 2021, till 2010, combined education investments had only been $500 million. So that was the starting point from the Stone Age to 2010, $500 million. And in the next 10 years, that number grew by almost 20 times to reach 9 billion, and then in 2021, almost 20. So we're off from a very slow start to a significant pickup in education technology. I think, what is crucial is now just historically, America has been the hotbed for edtechs, whereas for the first time now, the rest of the world, whether it's India, China, Middle East, hopefully companies like Abwaab, that's where the funding is now outstripping the US. So I think, there's a lot of education for investors as they look at the rest of the world, as they look at education, compared to even something like healthcare. And I guess investors also, some days we're sheep, some days we're lions, but we're always as a flock. That's the unfortunate part. So the journey goes up and down very quickly.
Thank you. Isaac, I won't ask you to choose between sheep or lion, or which you would be referred to yourself, but talk to me a bit about what your...
Pussycat.
A pussycat. Well, you can't argue with a kitten. Talk to me a bit about your business and your feelings about the level and the scope of investment within the edtech space at present.
I think really interesting to your statistic, COVID has had a tremendous effect, positive and negative, in a lot of different spaces, but the two spaces where it affected most was actually in healthcare and in education. And I'm an advisor to a firm called Owl Ventures. It's most probably today the leading venture capital firm in the world in education. 4 years ago, I think our first fund, or their first fund, was $100 million, and today we have close to $2 billion under management. And what shifted is in the education spaces, we've taken technologies that you would never think would go into education, and all of a sudden that's where they're going. So we invested in a company called Ment.io, which you could sit in a room of 10 people in a meeting, and it would listen in on the meeting, if you will, and at the end of a meeting really tell you who knew the most about any particular subject at any particular time. It was originally used for the military. It's an extraordinary company in machine learning and AI. When COVID came, we moved that company into the classroom, and we gave it to the professor, and you had all these students who were sitting around in the room, and they didn't know who read their assignments. There was no body language, and so this software was able to evaluate that and give a professor the insight. So to your point, there's a shift from healthcare, I think, or at least a growth in ed tech provided by COVID, new technologies, and the demand for accessibility that we've never needed before.
Amazing, so interesting. Let me come to you, Dino. COVID, good for business in this space?
So we've always said that education more broadly, and just for everybody's benefit, what GEMS Education does, we have the privilege of educating just over 150,000 students each and every day. So we run and operate schools. I like to think we sit at the heart of the education system, and we have a very unique perspective. Certainly the sector is resilient, and it's proved its resilience. Yeah. We've talked about it over many decades, but COVID enabled us to prove that thesis once again. The impact of COVID is twofold. I think in one respect, you can say that it has accelerated the adoption of education technology. It's brought it forward 10 to 15 years. So that's certainly something that we can all recognize as a good thing. The unfortunate element, though, and the issue that still remains, is the fact that that acceleration of adoption hasn't been universal. It hasn't been equitable. And this is true whether you're comparing developed or developing nations, whether you're comparing high-performing systems or low-performing systems. There has always been inequity of access and inequity of access to quality. The learning gap that has existed has only widened. So if you actually look at the most recent World Bank report on education, the economic impact due to learning loss as a result of COVID was estimated to be $17 trillion in lifetime earnings for this generation of learners. Now that's staggering. Yeah. It creates opportunity, certainly, but it does require a level of collaboration across all of the key stakeholders in order to ensure that we can address that challenge, because it is a staggering issue that not just has an economic impact, but will have adverse consequences for society and humanity at large. So good and bad.
So many interesting things that you say. I'm going to come back to every single one of them, I promise you this. But Hamdi,
yeah,
do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the point of a $17 trillion loss on its own is definitely staggering. And if you take a step back and you think about it, this is exactly, and you said it, it's an opportunity. And I think this is exactly why the birth and the growth of the edtech space is due exactly right now. The fact that a crisis managed to make that much of a shift is just an indicator of, I'm trying to be diplomatically correct, but essentially our education institutions haven't really evolved in a very long time, to the extent that when a crisis comes in this shape or form, it does that much damage. And I think the future is, with the power of technology, we will be able to deliver the highest quality education to the masses and make it affordable and make it mainstream, and also be resilient when situations like this happen and occur.
Ulrik, do you agree? Are we at some kind of inflection point? Is this a tipping point, the crest of a wave, if you like, for EdTech? What comes next?
I think it's actually a couple of years out, because I think there is a hangover from COVID with a lot of the school systems that we work on. But I also think it depends which level are we talking about. So Aaron and I we work in all 4 major segments of education: K-12, higher ed, corporate education. We also do a lot of government and defense, and it's very, very different. But in K-12, I think there will be a hangover for a while, because the teachers are tired. It's really, really hard to do anything. You know that better than anybody on the panel, I guess. You know, but it's like, I think it will take time. I think in higher education it's even worse, because a lot of higher education is at a nice equilibrium right now. It's not as bad as it could be, but there is massive disruption coming. Where I really see things changing faster is in the adult learning space, where the fact that companies are, like, there is a calculation that 2/3 of the Danish labor force, and it's probably the same in all of the countries, just happen to be a Danish, 2/3 were involved in the Great Resignation. 1/3 had quit their jobs, and 1/3 were about to onboard the new colleagues instead, in rough numbers. That is actually driving a really, really rapid change. So I think that it depends on what level of education we're looking at, and I think serious technology adoption is happening faster in some of those areas. The last part is, there are some really big leaps about to happen in education. Angela Merkel, one of the last things she did in Germany was to declare a massive agenda to change the approach to educational technology. Of course, those things are changing the agenda at scale.
So you believe that the universities will soon lose their monopoly on the type of elite education that they provide? Is that a potential?
So I think that a lot of universities are facing a really challenging future, where when you see that companies like Google are basically establishing an entire parallel credentialing system that is relevant, where the relevance of higher education has been brought in doubt by a lot of research the last 20, 30, 40 years. So I think that higher education is probably waking up to a really sobering message really soon, that things need to change, and it needs to change fast.
Dino, of course, you're on the other end of the scale, but in terms of higher education, are we waking up? Is the sleeping giant finally being poked deep enough?
So, agree entirely with Ulrik in the context of industry, to a great extent, is driving what we consider relevant, credentialed, qualified learning. To the extent where industry is actually reaching out now into our sector, because the 3 or 4 years that it apparently takes you to get a university degree is too long for them to wait, because they find they're having to intervene anyway with university graduates. So we're now seeing examples of tier 1 global multinationals that are working alongside K-12 schools to develop specific curricula, so effectively ensuring that young people, whether they're 11 or 13, are getting access to a curriculum that makes them industry ready much, much earlier on. And frankly, Silicon Valley, or if we look at that as some kind of barometer for innovative practice generally, Apple, Google, they've been hiring graduates from K-12, so high school graduates, for a decade or more. Yes, of course they still go to MIT, of course they still go to what we would all classify as the real elite top tier institutions, but for the broader workforce, they're literally skipping university. And so that, for me, isn't a great signal for higher education broadly, unless they fundamentally change the way in which they deliver. Now, whether this is the ability to be able to do a 4-year graduate program in 12 to 18 months, whether it's micro-credentialing, micro-qualifications, they will need to figure out how they can deliver value to its students. Otherwise, you probably have the top-tier institutions that are frankly continue to be sort of research-based, so there'll be exceptional research-based institutions, but otherwise, universities will become less and less relevant. It'll take a decade or more for us to see it, but that's certainly the trajectory it's on.
Ulrik, did you want to come back in now?
Yeah, so so I think it falls in two camps. One of them being really positive for K-12, which is, in the old days, what we were worried about was when companies were saying, oh, just educate them to this specific role early. You were ending up with very narrow education and for instance, citizenship and broader, often called soft skills, were not being developed. That's not what a bulk of the companies are asking today. They're actually hiring people who can learn, which means for K-12, I'm much less concerned that is a big challenge. I think K-12 will change, but I think K-12 will have an easier path towards changing. And I don't think it's necessarily dangerous that happens, because the problem is that higher education, particularly in the US, have had the issue that it just redid high school again to a wide extent. And then you started to learn something relevant, and you didn't get into a lot of those often called 21st century skills or power skills that the companies like the likes of Google are asking. They're testing them on whether they can learn when they come, and if they can learn, they know they can teach them the rest. That's why I think will drive that fundamental change in K-12, and that's what I think is the big headache ahead for higher ed.
Abhishek, let me take your view on this.
So I'll maybe simplify, again, as an investor and declutter. If you start at the earliest stage, pre-K, what's a good pre-K as a parent or a good kindergarten is invariably a pre-K which can get a kid into a good school. So if the pre-K can get someone into a gem school, normally it's a good pre-K, right? What's a good school? Invariably, whether you're in Africa, India, America, a good school is something which invariably gets a kid into a good college. What's a good college is invariably gets a good job. What's a good job, at least in Asia, invariably gets you a decent wife. So if there was a pre-K which could get you a good wife, people would take that any day, right? Now, in the absence of the pre-K, which is so amazing, I think, at least on the higher education, we've seen this. It's probably the only place where whether you go to Harvard or any of the old University of Pennsylvania, or in England you have Oxford and stuff, everything is 1500, 1600 and steeped in history, but also extremely, extremely old in terms of the way of working, right? So it's the only industry I know where these things have survived, and we live in the past in that sense, and hence bringing this change, it's like that comic you guys may have seen of Who Wants Change? Everyone puts the hand up, and then it says, who wants to change? Everyone puts the hands down. So I feel like that's the conundrum which one typically faces in this higher education side.
Thank you. Isaac, let me come to you on this. We need to cover much ground in the 10 minutes that we have left, but what is exactly new and exciting in the educational space that we should be getting excited about, enthusiastic about? And in terms of the levels of adoption and rollout, what are the barriers to making it more mainstream?
Well, so I think there's vertical and there's horizontal. So we're very involved in a company, it's content related, and what it's done is it's taken 150 magazines and taken the content and streamed it for K through 12. Really, it's K through 8. And you now can read the news in 15 minutes on your laptop, at the age of 10 or 9. Curating it, of course, all the politics is an issue, but let's leave that out of it. So you have those kinds of technologies that are very targeted, but they can be rolled out to the masses. And I'd say we're most probably in 1,000 different schools, and all you have to do is really just, hit a button. So the accessibility and using the infrastructure of Ulrik here, you can actually get those things out to the students very, very quickly. So I'd say that's one type of technology. And then another type of technology would be in the AI, the machine learning, very targeted. You have targeted medicine, I forget what it's called, where you can actually look at the genome and personalize
precision medicine.
Precision medicine.
Yeah.
Why not have precision education? And you can do it in a class of 30 people, and you can deliver it that way without anyone really knowing that they're being targeted, or the opposite, that they're being helped in a specific way. And so we've seen lots of different technologies where you can do precision education, and you can really help the student, to your point, but you don't have to go to the best preschool and the best this and the best that, because it's the tools and the content and the technology that's actually getting you there. So in essence, it's what's equalizing almost education using technology.
So important, and we'll come on to that in just a second. But Hamdi, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna give like a real life example of how curating this experience could look like for someone using technology. If you're a student and you get a question in class that says 3 plus 1, and I gave this example earlier at the talk today, if you get a question of 3 plus 1 and you're supposed to answer 1, 2, 3, or 4, and a student answers 2, you immediately deduct that that student thought it was a subtraction function instead of an addition function. And if that student answered 3 plus 1 equals 3, they would have thought it's a multiplication function.
Yeah.
So, and then if it was 4, obviously it's correct. And then from answering 3 plus 1 equals 2, you immediately take that student to learn the fundamentals of subtraction and addition. And the one that did 3 plus 1 equals 3, take them to understand the difference between multiplication and addition. So, and imagine how far that could go to in terms of curating the experience for a student, where, again, to your point, they don't really feel that they're being targeted or curated, but you could achieve that with the power of technology.
Ulrik, where do you stand on precision education?
Yeah, well, so obviously, I think some people will give us credit for having invented adaptive learning in the modern ages, and have built like more than 2,000 products used by 100 million students is exactly precision and adaptive learning. And I would caution a little bit about the jumping from the 3 plus 1 equals 2, therefore we can infer that they made a subtraction mistake. What we've seen is that it's really quickly gets much more messy, and that the content curation cost explodes after that. We have made well over 2,000 full products, a lot of them together with McGraw-Hill back in the days, and there's been a whole wave of companies that ended up in traps where it works initially, but it's really, really hard to scale. I do think, though, that the breakthroughs you can get with these technologies are astounding. Like, we have shown over and over again, no matter what population we look at, that we can roughly cut time to initial proficiency down to half, meaning you can learn it in half the time. But the other part, which is more important, is that is despite the fact that we're doing 100% competency check. Hey, there went the exams. They're not necessary anymore. And we can handle the fact that the slowest and the fastest learners learn with a difference of an order of magnitude. What takes the fastest 12 minutes takes the slowest to eventually get it 2 hours. And the systems can handle that if you use these kind of systems. You can cut down people's ability to not know what they don't know to about half as well. So that you're looking at something that back of a napkin calculations, Mr. Biden or President Biden could get rid of student debt in another way. Just deploy these systems. The added productivity and the additional tax payments of getting people who faster through or failing less in college would be more than enough in 10 years to pay for this. So it's something where we're talking about massive, massive implications if you can deliver these kind of things. But this is not new data. That's why I'm less optimistic that it will happen quick. This is a 10-year-old data I'm quoting here. So we've known this for a while. This made McGraw-Hill very valuable, at least at a long period of time. But it was something where it hasn't necessarily had the wider policy implications.
So interesting. Moving from the mature markets to the developed and emerging ones. Dino, let me come to you.
Sure.
What do you predict in terms of the level of rollout and adoption to make more inequity in education, and how do we ensure this kind of education for all?
So in terms of, certainly what I would say is that in an emerging or a developing context, because the baseline of what they have is next to non-existent, the desire to adopt is perhaps greater. However, if you are going to those markets with a relatively sophisticated education technology solution or provision, you need to understand that the teachers in those classroom settings will not have the ability to be able to utilize that appropriately. So there's a nuance and almost a leveling that you will need to do in terms of how you roll some of this out. Funding is an interesting one. So I remember sitting with an education delegation from an African nation, and we were talking about, not just education technology, but how we could support them in reforming their education system. And so I was giving them some numbers, and the natural response that I got was, but I don't see how we can afford this. So I was like, okay. I said, do you pay your teachers every day of the year that they work. They go, yes, sure, we pay them a yearly salary. I said, yeah, but you have absenteeism rates in your schools 50% of the time. So a teacher does not show up every other day in their classroom. Every other day. Imagine that. So when you hear about class sizes in emerging and or developing nations where it's one teacher that's teaching 70, 80 students at a time, it's driven by absenteeism and frankly, global shortage of teachers. Yeah, 70 million is the current global teacher shortage. That will accelerate to 100 million over the course of the next decade. It's a staggering challenge. So there is some nuance to it. Funding is an interesting part, but again, funding is there, the money is there, the opportunity sets are there. My father has a saying, he's the founder of GEMS Education. He goes, every other sector, technology has changed our lives. Fundamentally, we've been disrupted, except if you look at a classroom today versus a classroom from 100 years ago, essentially it is the same. So why is it that education as a sector has been the slowest to be disrupted? It's because nobody's dying, he would say. When you've got disease, healthcare is a good example. When you've got global famine, a disease, you've got climate change, these are issues that you can rally people around. People will respond. But in education, to see the deterioration of may take you 20 years. You don't see it today. You won't see it tomorrow. You won't see it in a year's time. So the compulsion for the world to actively act, it's not necessarily there.
Well, we have to end on an optimistic note, but I take your point. Absolutely, there are great challenges, but also great optimism, Hamdi. Give it to me.
A lot of optimism indeed. And I think to support Dino's point, in terms of starting where the baseline is, indeed, edtech startups that are operating in developed countries or developing countries, I believe, have to start somewhere. And you have situations where, just think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the beginning, you just need to learn basic concepts of math and physics. And we've done that. We've done that in a couple of remote villages in Jordan, where certain students were completely out of school for absenteeism, for being in a refugee status, or for teachers not showing up for an entire semester. And we ran it with a pilot, and we have a group of students. One of them is actually 20 years old, and she's still in grade 7. And she went back to learn purely on the back of an online product that we were able to offer as a bundle of a subscription with Abwaab and a tablet and data. And she managed to actually go back to school. And she passed her year, and her colleagues managed to pass grade 12 with scoring above 89 or 90% and just get through. So definitely for everyone in the edtech space, at least in developing countries, we should think of starting where the baseline is, getting students on track to be learning and developing and excelling through school, and from there, the sky's the limit in terms of innovation and AI and everything around that.
That's the headline I wanted. The sky is the limit. And I know you and your dad, Sunny, feel the same, Dino. Unfortunately, that marks the end of class. It's time for recess. So please join me in thanking my esteemed guests for their contribution today. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.